Now, it was mentioned earlier in testimony and in questions that donor lists were requested by the IRS. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. In some cases.
In some cases.
Not all these cases by any stretch of the imagination, sir.
And did the acquisition of those lists ever lead to additional, or did those lists trigger any further inquiries or new inquiries?
No, I believe what happened is when they hit the paper, we discussed it. We told people to look, I'll go back for a moment. Donors can be relevant, but they certainly shouldn't be in every case. They shouldn't be asked in every case, because they can be relevant if a donor has a contract with the organization, if the donor is doing it for a political purpose, but to just ask for donors without a rationale shouldn't be done. When we saw that it happened, we asked that, if they hadn't sent them in, we reached out and said, don't send them in. If they had sent them in, we said, we're not going to use these, and we didn't. You will not find them used in any of these cases. There was something, I don't know how many of these cases there were, maybe 30 or something like that is my understanding. I could be wrong on that. More than half of those were not Tea Party cases that got these donor list requests, by the way.
Okay.
But going back, it was overly broad. It was not necessary.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Mr. George, I'll ask you the same question. In the cases where donor lists were requested, was it your finding that those lists perhaps triggered further inquiries?
While I don't have an answer to that aspect of your question, Mr. Smith, I do know that 27 donor lists were requested.
27 donor lists were requested.
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Miller, on the safeguards against bias, I think the underlying concern of this entire situation is that bias was applied. And can you share whether there were safeguards in place that were not honored to try to prevent the bias before this situation came about?
So obviously, I don't think, and again, whether it was bias or perception of bias will play out over time. Let me tell you that we have something on the exam side of the house that has worked remarkably well, and that is before anybody gets selected for examination by reason of political activity, it goes through a committee. So no one person can do this. So, and that cuts down on the bias. We do a better job of precisely explaining why we're doing it. On the determ side, less so. So what we've done is elevated the issuance of the criteria to a higher level in the organization.
Thank you. And Mr. George?
And I would just point out, sir, of the 27, 13 were from Tea Party groups of the donor lists.
Donor lists. Okay.
All right. Thank you. Time has expired.